Do you like this show and want to make your own? Let me tell you about Anchor. It's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Now you can even add any song from Spotify directly to your episodes. The possibilities are endless for what you can create, whether it's music analysis, your own radio show, or something the world's never heard before. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so you can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can also make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. It's that time, the Betting Predators podcast, where our main objective is hunting down the best bets for you. I'm your host, Sleepy J. You guys can find me on Twitter at SleepyJ_pregame. Joined here by the NBA fanatic, the NBA guru, Jay Smooth. You guys can find him on Twitter as well at Smooth_702. And you can find us both on the best sports betting information site on the web, pregame.com. All right, guys, here we go. NBA Friday. Jay Smooth and I, we're going to go ahead. We're going to cover, we'll cover two games for you. I'm going to go ahead and cover the Clippers at the Sixers and the Knicks at the Mavericks. First line of business here, Smooth. We're going to go back to the Nets and the 76ers result from Wednesday night. We gave out two picks. Actually, let me correct myself. You gave out a pick. I gave out a pick. I gave out a bad one. I gave out the Bulls. That game wasn't even close. That was just a flat-out loser. So I'll take ownership for that one. And then you and I, we kind of really jumped on the Sixers, against the Nets. And, that was a game in which, Philadelphia controlled, I would say, 8 to 14 points for pretty much the majority of the game. And they ended up sitting Kyrie in the fourth quarter. Kyrie actually had a pretty big game, but Philly ends up not being able to cover that game. The reserves for the Nets came in. They played really well. They really pushed, Philly to the brink. But that was a game that kind of just soured me. We were going back and forth a little bit on Twitter watching the game. I just felt like we had a really, really solid bet there. The fact that we gave that one out at -6.5. KD got ruled out. That line closes 9, Philly at home, with no KD, no Harden, and Kyrie being out there. And the fact that he didn't play the fourth quarter, it just didn't sit well with me. Simmons and Kormats ended up missing free throws there late. And that really was a decider because we probably, more than likely would have covered the game had those guys hit, just one more free throw. But it looked like a lackluster effort there by the 76ers late in that game. But I think one of the things we certainly have to talk about with the Nets is the fact that, LaMarcus Aldridge is up and retired today because of health concerns. It seemed like he kind of just pulled the plug there, Smooth, more concerned for his health. And look, I mean, that guy's had a great career. At one time, he was a dominant force in this league. I don't know what you think, necessarily with the Nets, with, Aldridge stepping out of there. But I felt like that could be something that they really needed. It was a component of that team that I felt like it was probably going to be needed, come playoff time that, it's going to end up missing now. But how do you feel about the Aldridge, retirement? And then if you want to swing back and talk a little bit about that 76ers Nets game, I know you were a little bit upset about that one as well. So you can go ahead and you can talk about that stuff.
Yeah, that was obviously a tough one to lose. Felt that we was on the right side, had a strong handicap for it. For the people that like a lot of closing line value, we definitely had a lot of it, giving out 6.5 and then closing at 9 once KD was ruled out that you mentioned. And then just watching that game, a little bit back and forth because Kyrie was having a great game. But, Philly was still able to be in control, and then they really took control of it in the second half, up by as much as 20-plus points, in the fourth quarter alone. And just kind of, not kind of, but took the foot off the gas. And, the Nets reserve just kept playing hard and, ended up losing, like you mentioned, a couple of free throws blown late by, one by Simmons and one by Korkmaz. But, yeah, it was a real tough one to lose. I don't know how you feel about it, but if I'm, on the losing side, I much rather would have a loss like that Bulls ticket versus, having something that looks like it's going to be a good cash with that Sixers ticket, but ended up, not cashing by half a point, from a couple missed free throws late. But the Aldridge news, I think it hurts him a little bit more than anticipated. He brings a lot of versatility when he's healthy. to that roster. I think that's what they were kind of expected and counting on, not to have any type of holes in their roster, assuming, all guys healthy, with the big three, Aldridge and maybe a Blake Griffin or a Joe Harris out there that keeps the floor space. I like DeAndre Jordan because he's more of a presence on the inside, from a defensive standpoint, a big lob threat. But, once they get into the playoffs and you're, going to look to rely on DeAndre Jordan, could be tough coming down the stretch of games, in crunch time in games. He's not that reliable from the free throw line, and he doesn't bring a lot of, versatility that LaMarcus Aldridge brings, as far as being a guy that could, step out and hit that, that mid-range jumper, either from 15 to 17 feet out, and towards the basket. He was a good pick and pop presence, pick and roll presence as well. Nice touch around the rim. Multiple time All-Star, multiple time All NBA player throughout his career. Really, made his name, and his reputation was, well earned from his days in Portland. But he also has some great years statistically wise, when he was in San Antonio. They weren't as much of a legit title threat, or the year that Kawhi got hurt in the Western Conference Finals with the Warriors. Then I think the year after that, Kawhi, was left or traded. They really wasn't much of a threat to win the title ever since then. But, he obviously was one of the most respected, players at his position for his career. So I think with the Nets, moving on without him, I think they was kind of, counting on him to, to bring something to the team that, their other bigs didn't quite bring, outside the exception of maybe a Blake Griffin, if he can stay healthy. But I think it might hurt a little bit them moving on without him. But obviously, he has to do what's best for him, and his health is obviously a much more greater concern. So, you never want to play around with something like that. And I think he even went back and mentioned just whether he wasn't, looking or feeling quite like himself the handful of games that he did play with the Nets. He's definitely making the right decision, looking out for himself and his health. But it will help. It will hurt the Nets, moving forward. At least I think it will.
I'm in agreement with you here with the Aldridge loss. I think that was going to hurt. I'm going to say more than anything, like let's just say they had a matchup against Embiid. The fact that Aldridge can go ahead and hit that mid range, it's going to get Embiid, out of the paint. It's going to get him away from the basket. And I feel like, DeAndre, like he's not going to be that, like they're not going to respect a whole lot of his mid range game. He's going to help you in the defensive end, alley oops. But I would far rather have, a player like Aldridge. And you were talking about Kawhi, you were talking about, the years with the Blazers. Like, Aldridge was pretty close, to going ahead and getting a ring with those teams. And I thought that, maybe we would get like this, extra effort from him, knowing that, his career was kind of winding down, that this might have been, the one time that he was going to be able to go ahead and get a ring. But yeah, it's unfortunate, man, that things like that unfolded for him. Certainly, a player I'll never forget. Now, you mentioned Kawhi. Clippers are going to be on the road here. They're going to play the Sixers. Sixers are going to be -2.5 here. We don't have a total for this game. As of right now, it looks like Kawhi is going to be questionable for this game. I like Philly again, and it's not easy to pull the trigger, on a team that kind of let you down, especially at the free throw line with and just for me personally, Smooth. When it comes to Simmons, I respect him on the defensive end, but I just don't respect him a whole lot on the offensive end. And the fact that he let me down on the free throw line, it's just it's another feather in the cap for me to just kind of dislike Simmons. I thought that Philly made a big mistake, by not getting rid of him and trying to pick up Harden. And we obviously what Harden's doing right now. I think he would have been a great mix, for the Sixers. But getting back to the game, I lean strong here towards Philly. More than likely, I'm probably going to play them. The line's -2.5. And even though Philly got a big win, versus the Nets, the Sixers, they kind of got drugged through the coals, the next day after that win. And mostly it was because, the 76ers didn't finish off that route of the Nets. We know there were no Harden, there was no KD, and Kyrie didn't even play the fourth quarter. But, the 76ers, they let the Nets go ahead and make that surge and actually cover that game. And, the big talking point on ESPN, at least it was on First Take the next morning, was, quote unquote, were you satisfied with the 76ers win? And, that kind of just made me wonder, like, if the Sixers are seeing that, that has to motivate them for this particular game to go ahead and close out, another good team, in the Clippers. I think they're going to come in here full force. They're going to go ahead. They're going to play a full 4 quarters, and we know how good that team is at home. Now there is an injury concern here for Philadelphia. It will be with Tobias Harris. Tobias Harris right now listed as questionable, and Kawhi listed as questionable. But I do believe it's probably Kawhi out of the two players that is probably less likely to play. And look, if Kawhi's out, I think this line probably shoots up to Philly. I would say -5, -6. But I still like Philly, even if Kawhi plays, laying 2.5 points. So I don't know necessarily how you feel about this one, but I feel like there's a good possibility that if we bet this now, that there's a really good chance we get a bargain price on Philly, especially if Tobias Harris plays and Kawhi's out. And we're going to end up with a Philly team that's going to put in a really big effort to go ahead and get another big home win, close out a good team, and to go ahead and say, you know what, the other night that was just kind of a little bit of a hiccup, against the Nets, especially against those reserve players. So I am a little hesitant, to go ahead and back Philly again, but I can't let, a loss go ahead and keep me from making money. And I certainly believe Philly's the right side here. So I'll go ahead, I'll play Philly -2.5. Smooth, how you feeling about that Clippers and Sixers game?
Yeah, I would agree with you. Back in the Sixers in this spot, just a couple points to add on to what you already laid out there. One thing that's a bit of an not mentioned enough when it comes to handicapping the NBA is just the scheduling spot. So some teams are at a disadvantage versus teams that are at an advantage, and for this matchup, I think the Clippers are at a disadvantage with this being their third game in 4 days. This is also the last game, of a East Coast road trip. I think this is their fourth East Coast game. The market is going to be, looking to back, the Clippers because of the win streak that they've been on lately, and then seeing how the Sixers blew a 20-point lead, in the fourth quarter. To mostly, Nets reserve in their last games, and adding on also to the fact that, Philly could have, some more motivation for this matchup because of how they didn't close out the game against the Nets in the headlines as far as, could you, be satisfied with this win? Also, Doc Rivers, he took, he was happy getting the win, but he didn't seem too satisfied with the Sixers transition defense in that game. So even though they got the win, those are also some things that coaches like Doc Rivers, can use to, get the attention of his team to focus a little bit more on, moving forward, especially in their next game, because there's also another ESPN primetime game against another top team out of the opposite conference where they could potentially see, in the finals if both teams come out. Also adding on to the fact that, if Kawhi sits, Paul George has been playing really hot lately, but if Kawhi sits this game, that would mean that Ben Simmons would draw Paul George more as far as a defensive matchup, and I think Ben Simmons is the best defender in the league. He's really the one player, in my opinion, that guards 1 through 5 and does an elite job at it. Him being as big as he is, as strong as he is, and as athletic as he is, and just the willingness to want to play defense, I think that'd be a tough matchup for Paul George on the defensive end, even though he's been playing, really hot lately. And, they could have some tired legs, up against a scheduling disadvantage like they are right now. And then, Joel Embiid, him going for pretty much 40 points, 15 rebounds in their last matchup. The Clippers don't really pose a lot of size. Their biggest guy right now with Serge Ibaka out is Zubac. That's a matchup that clearly favors Joel Embiid. Maybe you might see some DeMarcus Cousins in this game, but with him not really in the rotation or in the mix as much as I thought he would be once he was picked up, you just have to give the edge to Embiid. And with his MVP campaign, getting another look at him in prime time night, he could be, I think he's going to come out and be aggressive again. So even if Tobias Harris sits, I think, Embiid and Simmons, would be able to provide, a little bit more offense Just enough offense, to get the cover against the Clippers in this spot.
You brought up a few good points, and I think maybe the most important point was the fact that Philly didn't close out that game, and maybe we're getting a little bit of value here. And I think a lot of the times, the sports books, and I fall in line with them with not respecting Philly. I feel like Philly, in a sense, is just more of a regular season type of team, and their future odds, reflect more of who they kind of are in a sense. And if you look at the playoff odds, like I think right now they're like the third team in the East to go ahead and represent the East. Where it's kind of crazy when you look at the standings. They're the number one team in the East, so we might be getting some value there, just within the line just for that. And then the last result, with the Sixers, I do like the fact that you mentioned Simmons is going to end up on Paul George, and I think that if Kawhi's not out there, with an elite defender like Simmons on PG, with the way that he's playing, I feel like there's a possibility that Paul George might go out there and still just try to do Paul George things and keep up, the way that he's been playing. That there is a potential with that really tough matchup that he just simply could just shoot the Clippers, right out of the game. And then 76ers will be able to go ahead and kind of focus on closing out. And you had brought up a really good point with Doc Rivers. Like, if you watch that game where they were playing against the Nets, he was visibly upset, with the transition defense. You're 100% right about that. He was up, he was clapping, he was snapping his fingers at players, like wonder what the hell is going on, putting his hands on his hips. And it's kind of a reminder, like, look, even though we're going up against, a bunch of, bench players for the Nets, these guys can come back on you if you're lazy. Now, what happens if we're going and we're playing, a team with all their starters in there, Kyrie, KD, Harden? What happens then? We run the risk of losing games that, that we should be winning, especially when we're winning comfortably. So I think Rivers probably got in their ear. And the fact that it ended up on the news the next day, it could have been a good story for Philly. And it turned it out, to end up being kind of a negative story after all was said and done. But that's what I'll go ahead and do there with the 76ers. The fact that Jay Smooth put some whipped cream and cherries on top of that one, I'll go ahead and I'll like the Sixers here, guys. I'll go ahead, I'll play them at minus the 2.5. Next game we'll cover the Knicks at the Mavericks. Mavs are going to be -5 here at home. We have no total on this game. Jay Smooth, you have a pick in this one. I agree with it. What are you going with, Knicks Mavericks?
I like the Knicks. I'm gonna grab the points. I think it opened up at 5, down to 4.5, or open up at 5.5, down to 4.5 right now. So I'll grab the points with the Knicks. I think this is a nice revenge spot for the Knicks. These teams played not too long ago, back on the 2nd in New York, and Dallas won by 13 on the Knicks' home floor. And the Knicks, only was able to score 86 points, with their three most important offensive players in Julius Randle, R.J. Barrett, and Derrick Rose combined to go 9 of 41 from the field. And, I don't think that that'll happen again. I think you'll get better performances from those three guys, especially with Julius Randle being an all-star. And this is also like a homecoming game for him, returning back to Dallas, the Dallas area where he, grew up. So I think he's going to play a lot better. The Knicks, they've been playing really, really good basketball as of late. It might be only 5-5 straight up on their last 10 games, but they're 7-3 against the spread, one in their last 4. And, like I said, with a coach like Tom Thibodeau, he doesn't, let go of, how, bad they played against the team in the previous matchup. So they'll come out. I think they'll come out. They'll be, ready to go from the tip. And mentioning a little bit about the Mavs, I think they're coming off a game, where I think they're going to be a little bit flat in this spot. They played a really good first half against the Grizzlies in their last one, but in the second half, they needed, everything they got, everything they had to fight off the Grizzlies. But they was trying to come back and get that wins, and it took a crazy, Doncic floater from the 3-point line, to get the win at the buzzer. So I think motions could be running a little bit high, still off of that game, and they could, come out and be a little bit flat against the Knicks. And I think this is also a favorable spot for the Knicks in Dallas. Their last 7 games, they're 6-1 against the spread in Dallas. So I'm going to take the Knicks with the points, and I would also look to put a little bit on the money line for the Knicks to get the upset win as well.
I do like that Knicks money line. That's ballsy, but I think that, everything that you mentioned kind of puts you, I mean, if you're betting a dog, if you're taking the points, you always, you kind of always want to have that feeling that they can win the game outright, because then it just makes, you taking the points feel so much better and so much stronger of a play. Now, I'll agree with you here. You mentioned a ton of stuff there, Smooth, and I'll kind of just read through my handicap. I feel like the Knicks are playing well right now. It's another true test for them, playing the Mavs team, and they're playing well too. I feel like the Knicks do have a situational spot advantage here. Once this road game's over for New York, they're going to end up playing 6 straight home games. The next road game for the Knicks is not going to come until May the 2nd, and that'll be actually against Houston. So, over like the next 6, 7 games, they're only going to play like 2 winning teams. So, if they can knock a win out here, go back home, they're going to be home for quite some time, as I had mentioned. There's a bunch of more games that they can go ahead and stack up some wins. The Knicks, they're going to try to avoid, that playing game, I believe, at all costs, right now sitting in the 6th seed. And the Mavs, they're coming off of that epic win that you talked about with Luka. It's probably going to end up being a flat spot here. But the Mavs, over the next 10 games, and this one being included in there, I mean, I think we should probably include the Knicks in here. They just have a ton of bad teams that they're going to play. I would say if you take every team in the NBA over their next 10 games, nobody is going to compare to the Mavs schedule as far as just bad teams. They're going to rip off a ton of wins here. I have for the Mavericks. I do think, with that and the big win, that they do probably breathe a little bit of fresh air. And as you had mentioned, the Knicks, they do have revenge in this game. The last time these teams played, the Knicks were in a back-to-back situation, and he had mentioned the shooting. Derrick Rose was just 1 for 10. Julius Randle just 5 for 12. RJ Barrett was 3 for 11, and quickly, he was 2 for 9. Typically, the Knicks as a group, they're not going to shoot that bad. So I think not only does the situation favor them here, and we have the revenge, the Knicks are right now on a little bit of a hot streak, and I feel like, that they'll be motivated to have a much better game, and they're going to keep the gas pedal down here, as they sit in the 6th seed. I don't believe, that there's any way, that the Knicks just simply shoot that bad as they did the last time these teams matched up. So the +5 for me is fine here. I think these teams are pretty close to, I would say pretty close to even on a neutral. So I have a feeling like the Mavs are being overvalued here, most notably probably because it's Luka. It will be a primetime game. And, there was a lot of noise circling the Mavs in their win the other night in that epic comeback buzzer beater there for Luka. So I'll be with you here. Smooth with the Knicks at the. I'll grab the +5. There are some +5s out there, +4.5. So make sure you guys go ahead and get the best number. Is there anything else Smooth in the NBA? Any kind of anything newsy going on that we can cover before we close this out?
The other big news, coming out of the NBA is recently, Zach LaVine's going to be out for at least maybe 10 days due to quarantine. So I think that could hurt their chances for a little bit trying to get into the playoffs.
Of course, you want to bring up the Bulls again, as I gave out, I would say, maybe one of my worst picks of the year. The fact they're laying like 9.5 points, they got blown out in that one. When it comes to LaVine, I feel like, at least you and I kind of agreed that he's the best player on a team. And if he's going to miss 4 or 5 games, currently with, where they're sitting in the standings right now, that's a team that can't really afford any type of, bad news or injuries. They're sitting in the 10th seed right now with a team like Toronto right behind them at 16.5 games back. Washington sitting at 16.5 games back. And we've seen what the Wizards have been doing, with Russ and Beal. Like this could be the kind of a, I don't want to say, the straw that broke the camel's back for Chicago, but, the fact that they've lost 4 in a row, you're going up against a terrible team in Orlando. I don't know, man, if they can go ahead and continue to win, games. And look, they're probably going to end up having, let me take a look here and see how many games they have. Because if LaVine's going to end up missing 10 games, they lost 4. Let's go through here. They got Memphis. That was actually a game we had talked about, but they're in a back-to-back. They got Cleveland, Boston, Cleveland again, Charlotte. So that'll be, over a 10. That's actually over a very short period of time. Smooth. That's only over the next 6 days. They're going to play 4 games in 6 days. This is not the time to lose a player like LaVine. I don't know how you necessarily feel about them, going into tomorrow's game against Memphis, but the fact that they're going to be on a back-to-back. I worry about Chicago right now. I don't like the fact that they're losing games against Orlando, Memphis, Minnesota, Atlanta. They're not exactly the cream of the crop teams there, and they're getting blown out. I mean, they got beat by 11 against Memphis. We should talk about that Memphis game. They're blown out by Atlanta by 12. They got blown out again by, I wouldn't want to say blown out against Orlando, but lost by 9 points at Orlando. Yeah, I have concerns right now for Chicago. So I don't know how you feel about Levine, but man, I'll tell you what, if he's going to miss 5 or 6 games, I mean, that could simply crush them with the way that the Wizards and the teams, behind them are playing. I know Toronto, they're going to rest a ton of people tomorrow. So it looks like, they might be, you know, just waving the white flag in the season, which I think is a mistake for that team. But that's kind of my thoughts, just, kind of just roughly. What do you think?
Yeah, I was even before this matchup when they had Levine in the lineup. Ever since they traded for Vucevic, I thought that was a really good move for them, especially for their future. Looking down, looking past this season, but even the rest of this season and trying to solidify a spot to get into the playoffs. But for whatever reason, the chemistry just hasn't been there. In the since they traded for Vucevic and just their last handful of games, against the Hawks when Zach LaVine went crazy and scored 40 points in the first half. They still lost that game. Laying 9. Hate to keep bringing this up because you gave it out, but laying 9 to the Magic at home and losing outright to the Magic, who's a team that's tanking and trying to get a top 4 pick or the number 1 pick. And that was with Levine in the lineup, and he's been their best player all season, all-star, obviously. So with him being out for, the next 10 days, like you mentioned, missing 4 to 6 games or so, I think that's going to be pretty tough for them to overcome. And, their next game, coming up without him tomorrow against the Grizzlies, a team that's, going to be motivated to come out there and get a win. I think they're gonna handle that. Something that just keeps me away from that game is just the line in terms of where it's at. I've seen where it's opened up as a pick to where it's been at 2.5, somewhere it's at 4. But I do think the Grizzlies are going to come out and take care of their business against a Bulls team that's going to be without, not only their best player but one of the better guards, so far in the league this season.
Yeah, I would lean maybe towards Memphis. The fact that you brought up, the Magic, they're going to end up playing, the Raptors, I was thinking about maybe looking at the Raptors, but I think that a team like Toronto, like they're opening up a can of worms not only for themselves but the entire league. The fact that that they're sitting right now currently sitting in the 11th seed right now, just one game back from being able to play in the playing game. And the Raptors are going to go ahead smooth, and they're going to turn around and they're going to rest pretty much every starter that they have. Lowry's not going to play, Siakam's not going to play, Anunoby's not going to play, and they're citing it because of rest. Well, I mean, how does that make any sense that you're only 55 games into the season? You're contending for a potential playing game, and the NBA, they wanted to make it more interesting with the playing games to give let's just say a team like the Pacers or the Raptors or somebody like the Spurs or the Pelicans, a chance to go ahead and get in there, because they make things more interesting. But no, the fact that a team like that's just taking their foot off the gas and just simply resting players, I believe that the NBA is going to take a hard look next season at kind of like reprimanding teams and reprimanding players, for simply not playing. And I think the Nets probably threw a big wrench into that too. Now, look, you could cite, that this guy's injured or that's, injuries happen. I get that. But I think the rest factor thing, you're only going to be allowed to do that so much, I think, next season. The NBA has to put an end to, where a team legitimately could make the playoffs and they're simply just going to rest a bunch of guys, over and over and over again. You're going to take out your whole starting lineup. So I do think we'll see some changes in that. That these TV companies, and these advertisers, they're paying a lot of money to get these games on there. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to go ahead and spectate these games live because of the limited capacity. But how would you feel if, you get tickets on Christmas Day and you're all excited because, you're going to go see, Steph Curry playing, this guy playing, that guy playing. You go to the game and it's Draymond Green's out there with Kelly Oubre. It was like, man, it kind of Christmas present kind of lost a little bit of value. I just have a feeling like the NBA has to do something to kind of fix it, whether they need to shorten the season or they make it where you can only have a certain amount of rest days for a player, which they'll end up citing injury for every guy to get around it. But they do have to do something in a sense to go ahead and try to fix guys just going ahead sitting out and being sat down just for rest for basically no reason when they can go out there and win a game. So I don't know how you feel about that, but we'll close it up with that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I just see it from both sides, from both sides. Talking about the league and the players. Obviously, the league wants their best players out there on the floor, in their league, but also the players. Even if they are sitting down for rest, I think it's just a different day and age to where, in this era, guys aren't just going to go out there and just, play, 82 games or play as much as possible like they did, back in the day, because of all the new science and technology in terms of telling you need rest for your body, that it could prolong these guys' careers. And also just from the standpoint from this season, even though it's going on, and they're getting the 72 game season in, this back half of the season, it's the most games that they've crammed into any, one period of time, because they're trying to meet a deadline to get this season over with to have the next season start on time. And, we're seeing a lot of injuries to a lot of key players, most recently Jamal Murray. He's the one that comes to mind. One of the young stars in the game is going to be out the rest of this year and going into next year. So guys are, doing the best that they can to try to prevent that, as well as play as many games, as they possibly can. But, it's an issue that's been, for the league for, the last couple of years or so. But I understand it more so, this year than any other year, just for how many games that they're cramming in. This back half of the season, there's a lot of teams playing, 3 games in 4 night situations, back-to-back situations. And then, the hardest part of the season is coming up around the corner with, 15, 18 games left in the playoffs. So you want to be as fresh and as healthy as you can be, going into that, when the most eyes are going to be on the product, for playoff basketball. So um, I just think that the league and the players at some point in time, probably more sooner than later, are going to come together. And I think the only conclusion that I can come up with is, once the season, gets back to the regular schedule next season, I would, suggest to extend the season and eliminate the back to back, so you can get more, rest in for guys. So, and, they won't have to, sit out games, because typically, not even just this year, but going back to the last couple of years, whenever I've seen a team playing their third game in 4 nights and the second night is on a back to back, almost anywhere from 70 to 85% of the time, one or two of those key players from those teams are going to miss that game. So it's just all about, playing a bunch of games, in a short period of time to try to avoid, to try to avoid injuries as much as you can. People are listening to science and saying that, you need rest in this era. And, you got to think about it. Like, if you want to see guys like Steph Curry and Kevin Durant and a LeBron James and a Jamal Murray and all these, elite players, we want to see these guys as healthy as possible, especially coming into the playoffs. So we don't want to lose, we don't want to lose players, period, but to lose them, in the regular season, they don't have to prove to me, they don't have to prove anything. I'd much rather see these guys healthy at their best, but I also understand, the league wanting to, see their top players in the game as much as possible, especially, not just sitting out if they don't have any significant injury. So I think it's something that they got to address, like you mentioned, coming up soon. But I do understand both sides of it.
Yeah, I feel like maybe the last 2 years just kind of put a stink on it. And, there's really nothing that the players could have done, to go ahead and probably, have the last 2 years go really any smoother. I mean, it was just a daunting challenge, for everybody, to even go ahead and go out there and play these games. I don't know, man. I just worry a little bit. Like, I think, like, honestly, if you asked the Jordan Bulls or the Showtime Lakers to play, some of these teams today, that those teams would just simply just get destroyed, against those particular teams. Like, I know it's a different era and everything like that, but I worry about, going out there and just playing, back to back games, playing defense, playing tough each and every night. Guys play 82 games. Like, I just worry that that the league is getting, it's getting soft, and guys just resting. I don't know. I just feel like they do need to go ahead and make some type of a change, and I do think that we'll see that. But you do make some really good points there, Smooth. But that'll wrap up the podcast, guys. So we give you guys what we give out there: 2 picks. I'll go ahead. I'll play the 76ers. I like that. Smooth, he likes the Knicks. I agree with him on that, and I feel like we'll go 2-0 on this particular podcast. As always, make sure you guys go ahead and follow us both on Twitter. You guys can get me at sleepyj_pregame. You can get Smooth at smooth_702. And you can find us both at the best sports betting information site on the web, pregame.com. With that said, I'd like to wish you guys all the best of luck on your Friday. Enjoy your weekend and enjoy the games.